it really happen? John Ronson meets people next on Full who suggest the lunar mission was all faked.
Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin never landed on the moon. Nobody's ever landed on the moon. The whole thing has been faked in a television studio. Out of all the conspiracy theories, this is possibly the most cogent, with hard photographic evidence and motives ranging from the nebulous to the persuasive.
I'm a filmmaker and professional photographer and have evidence that the visual record of the Apollo moon landings was both faked and encoded with the means by which we could detect these fakes.
I'm Barry Reynolds, originally a firm believer in the moon landings, now carefully reconsidering and evaluating the evidence, both for and against.
My name's Matthew Williams. I'm a believer in the paranormal. I used to be a skeptic, but one thing I don't believe in is that NASA has told us the truth about the moon missions.
My name is Marcus Allen. It's not a matter of belief in the moon landings, it's a matter of looking at the evidence. The evidence does not support the belief that man landed on the moon.
My name is Andy Thomas, and I'm a writer and a lecturer on the paranormal. And I believe there are persuasive clues to suggest that many of the NASA photographs of the moon landings have been tampered with or even fabricated.
My name is Mary Bennett, and during my research I have found serious evidence to suggest that Apollo astronauts did not actually set foot on the lunar surface.
Maybe I can start with you, Mary. Can you explain exactly what has happened over the last 30 years? Has nobody ever landed on the moon?
I wouldn't say that nobody has ever landed on the moon. I would say that the American Apollo astronauts that we have been led to believe landed on the moon during the Apollo space program did not, could not have done. And I will be prepared to eat my hat on this one, should I be shown to be wrong.
Mm. And where does this come from? Why do you think this never happened?
Firstly, because the photographic proof and various other hard scientific facts demonstrate that with the technology available at that time, it's highly doubtful that they would have been able to do that.
So let's start at the beginning. The space shuttle took off. We also
Yes, I must correct you. Space shuttle is recent. It was a Saturn V rocket.
Mm-hmm. So the rocket it took off. I mean, it definitely took off.
We saw it take off, and NASA has said, yes, we did.
There
go
were a
to
lot
the
of
moon.
people.
We all saw the rocket
certainly
take
left
off.
the Earth's surface,
Yes.
let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So I assume that the rocket took off and then landed somewhere where nobody was looking.
Well, a scenario could be that the craft took off with the astronauts in the capsule, because if anything should happen by way of a disaster at launch, we would want to see, unfortunately, the remains of the astronauts on board. But what could happen is that the craft would take off, the capsule will go into orbit. After all, that's a tried and tested way of getting into space, but it's only very low space, it's not real space.
Well, we see it going a long way up.
We see it going a long way
shot.
up. That's right. We see it going a long way up, out of sight.
Is out of mind.
That's right. The capsule can then orbit, and then there is no reason at all why it shouldn't land in the Pacific until the time when allegedly they are returning from the moon, and the capsule then can be put back into orbit and dropped down. Now, what happened in between, of course, is what we're going to discuss today.
I think the point is that why would they want to fake it? And that's what the question people would ask. But, I mean, it was so politically important at the time to get men on the moon, to beat Russia, be the first on the moon, that really when you've got those high stakes that anything could go wrong, and there's a million things that could go wrong, and as they say, not one thing went wrong, everything went right. They were very lucky that they got there in one piece. And with those sorts of odds, would somebody have said, well, okay, we can say they went to the moon, but nobody will know. But for our purposes and for the rest of the world, we will look like the world leaders in space. But we can fake those bits, and maybe we'll do them again. Maybe they'd done them previously, but they couldn't tell people, because there's sort of certain evidence to say that they've actually been to the moon earlier as well, and that's kind of interesting. Yes, I mean, yes, well, I mean, the Russians went and sent their probes up to the moon, the automatic probes.
Certainly, yes.
Yes, and there was evidence that there was certain sort of structures on the moon back in those days, taken from telescopes, yes. I mean, I've been following this as you've been following this, but I mean, I don't follow the theory that they didn't go to the moon. I actually believe they did go to the moon, but I'm just exploring the possibility that possibly somebody would have said, this is very dangerous, what we ought to do is not quite send them there, bring the people back alive.
Not quite sending somebody to the moon and actually getting them on the moon. Once you've got outside the Van Allen belt, it's the same difference. They cannot survive the trip. The radiation
yes,
is
you mean the
far too
radiation
strong.
stories, yes. I've heard
So,
about
so
that.
once you're outside there, whether you not quite is the same as being dead.
Do we know that that's
Yes.
true for certain, that you can't survive outside the Van Allen belts without several feet of lead? I mean, is that a proven
You can't
fact?
get several feet of lead off the planet with the rocket technology
Shall we
that they had in
explain
the
actually what the
60s.
Van Allen belt is?
Yeah.
I assume that's an area somewhere over the ozone layer. Which
Yes, it's way beyond the ozone layer. It stretches between about 600 miles and many thousands of miles out into space. When we talk of the space shuttle going into orbit, this is only a few hundred miles up. It's designed
between
only...
200 and 300 miles up.
That's correct.
It.
That's
That's
it.
as far as anybody goes.
But the Van Allen belt is the belt that protects us on this planet. Living on this planet is equal to being protected by about 10 meters or over 30 feet of water. That's the protection from radiation that we get walking around on the surface of this planet. Now imagine being in a tin can, going through the radiation belt, which is very, very intense, and beyond the Van Allen belt, there's no protection at all. So we're going virtually naked before creation, beyond the protective belt of our planet, in a tin can and in basically a linen suit with a plastic visor.
Which we don't keep down because we want to have a
Yes.
look out.
Now, the scientific measurement of what happens to you beyond the Van Allen belt is very interesting. If you are exposed to more than 300 REMs, which is the measurement they used in the 60s, you are likely to die within a few days, perhaps 40%. 500 REMs and about 50% of people will be dead in a few days.
So you said it's physically impossible that anybody's ever been on the moon. It's never
You didn't
happened.
actually say that.
No, you can send anyone
But in the
or
60s
any living thing to the moon, but as Kennedy said that they wanted to do, can you bring them back alive? That's the question. Because if they're fried, you can get them there, perhaps. But if you have
But they've
people
all
like
been
Armstrong and Aldrin
Well, they've
still
all been
alive,
interviewed on TV afterwards. All of them, haven't they?
yes. Yes.
So, yeah. So
Maybe
they
they
could never have
didn't.
gone up there in the first
Well,
place.
this is the
That's
conclusion
right.
one has to come to.
Maybe they didn't go as far, did they? Maybe they
And
were still
you see,
inside
the only
the
safe
protected
distance
belt.
to go is
Yes.
up to the point of the Van Allen belt,
Mm.
which is where the shuttle goes.
Well below.
Well below, in fact.
300. They
It
won't
goes only
go
halfway
higher.
there.
So where do you come from? You're a photographer, and so you looked at these photographs as a professional photographer rather
Yes.
than as somebody who was interested in conspiracy theories.
Yes, there was no conspiracy in the early days. In fact, I used to be a cinema projectionist, and in the 60s, I was running a cinema in Hampstead, the classic Hampstead. And when we landed on the moon, I put up a slide to the audience. I said, July, we put the date at the top, 20th of July, 1969, man has set foot on the moon. It's exactly what I wrote on this slide.
And did everybody in
Put
the
it, they all
audience...
clapped and cheered, and it was up there for quite a few minutes. And it was
Did they not,
wonderful.
after a while, say, can we see the film now?
Well, the film is still going. This was superimposed over the picture.
Oh, that
Really?
must have really pleased them.
I don't know, it's exciting
And it was
moment.
wonderful. And a lot of people watched it live on television and so forth. But because I'm also a filmmaker, I got a hold of the material that was the alleged tele-recordings of the transmissions. There are many hours, over 80 hours worth, of transmissions, allegedly from the moon. And I started comparing these photographs, which are full of holes in themselves, with the TV coverage. I think one example I could give you is of Aldrin coming down the ladder. It's quite a famous picture. In fact, there are a set of pictures. So not only do we have problems with the lighting, where we can see quite clearly that despite the fact he's coming down the ladder in the shade, he's perfectly bright, equally bright to the surface of the moon beyond him.
And Neil Armstrong wasn't standing
Well,
there
interestingly
with a
enough,
flash.
Neil Armstrong has to be standing here in order to take the picture. But when you look at the television coverage of our friend coming down the ladder, Neil Armstrong is standing somewhere else.